Some might call it an obsession. I call it appreciation. Vintage watches, my friends, are more than just dusty relics. They're miniature time machines, each tick whispering stories of eras gone by. Imagine a dapper gent in the 50s checking his wristwatch before a big date, or a wartime pilot relying on his trusty chronograph for a daring maneuver. These watches have seen it all, their faces reflecting the passage of time in a way no modern smartwatch ever could. Now, I'm not talking about those mass-produced quartz things they churn out these days. I'm talking about proper mechanical watches, the ones with tiny gears, springs and screws all working in perfect harmony. They don't just tell time, they celebrate it. The craftsmanship, the artistry, it's enough to make a grown man weep, though I wouldn't recommend doing that in public. These beauties are built to last, but even the toughest vintage watch needs a bit of TLC after decades of service. That's where the magic happens, in the workshop, where skilled hands breathe life back into these ticking treasures. Let's face it, old watches are a bit like classic cars. They're gorgeous to look at, but under that polished exterior, there's bound to be a few creaks and groans. Years of wear and tear take their toll. The most common ailment, dried up lubricants. It's like arthritis for a watch, making the gears sluggish and the hands stutter. Then there's the inevitable wear on delicate parts. Tiny pivots wear down, springs lose their springiness, and those delicate hairsprings, they're as fragile as a politician's promise. And let's not forget the elements. Moisture is a vintage watch's worst enemy, causing rust and corrosion that can be a right pain to deal with. But here's the thing, these problems aren't insurmountable. A good watchmaker approaches these challenges like a skilled mechanic tackling a vintage Aston Martin. It's about respect for the craft, a deep understanding of the mechanics, and a steady hand that could disarm a bomb or at least replace a balance wheel without sending springs flying across the room. Now, some people think fixing a vintage watch is like performing open-heart surgery on a gnat. And to be fair, it can be a tad fiddly, but it's also incredibly rewarding. First, you've got to carefully open the case back, like a surgeon making the first incision, and believe me, you don't want to slip and scratch that vintage beauty. Next comes the disassembly. Every tiny component, from the mainspring to the minute hand, is meticulously removed and inspected. It's like an archaeological dig, uncovering the watch's history one layer at a time. Worn parts are cleaned, oiled, or replaced with painstaking care. And if you're lucky enough to find original spare parts, well, that's like striking horological gold. Finally, after hours of meticulous work, comes the moment of truth, reassembly. It's like putting a complex puzzle back together, except the pieces are microscopic and prone to pinging across the room if you sneeze. But when it's all back together, ticking away happily, well, that's a feeling of satisfaction you just can't beat. Tales from the workbench of pocket watches and presidents. Over the years, I've had the pleasure and occasional headache of working on some fascinating timepieces. Once a charming old lady brought in her grandfather's pocket watch. It had been sitting in a drawer for decades, silent and forgotten. As I repaired it, I imagined the stories it could tell. Had it been present at a wedding, a birth, a farewell on a train platform? Then there was the time a distinguished gentleman brought in a Rolex, claiming it once belonged to Winston Churchill himself. Now, I'm not one to pry, but I couldn't resist a little chuckle. Sure, mate, I thought, and I've got Big Ben in my shed. Turns out he had the paperwork to prove it. I treated that watch with the utmost respect, handling it like it was ticking with historical significance. These aren't just watches, they're vessels of personal and historical significance. Each one has a story to tell, a journey through time that deserves to be honored and preserved. More than just gears and springs. The soul of a vintage watch. You see, vintage watches are more than just devices that tell time. They're tangible links to the past, whispering tales of craftsmanship and artistry. The way the light plays off a vintage dial, the satisfying click of a well-worn crown, the gentle sweep of a second hand that seems to defy the digital age. It's enough to make a chap wax poetic. They remind us of a time when things were built to last, when attention to detail mattered, and when a watch wasn't just an accessory but a cherished heirloom passed down through generations. In a world of disposable gadgets, they're a refreshing reminder of enduring quality and timeless style. And that, my friends, is worth preserving. Keeping time alive, a legacy for future generations. In this age of disposable everything, Vintage watches stand as a testament to enduring craftsmanship and timeless elegance. They're more than just timepieces, they're pieces of history, each tick a whisper from the past. By repairing and preserving them, we're not just keeping time, we're keeping stories alive. We're ensuring that future generations can marvel at the ingenuity and artistry of these miniature marvels. So, the next time you see a vintage watch, take a moment to appreciate it. Imagine the stories it could tell, the journeys it's been on. And if you're lucky enough to own one, cherish it, because you're holding more than just a watch. You're holding a piece of history. And that's something truly special.